Now this one's a little bit different for you guys. These uncut interview sections I've been posting are all from kind of raw tape interviews that I've done for other reasons. So a lot of times we do an EPK or an electronic press kit, they call it, where everything gets edited down to 5 minutes. And other times you just want one or two sound bites from somebody and you're going to put that into another piece, which is what happened on this one. This is a really famous producer, Phil Ramone. Well, he first started working with Ray Charles really early on, and then his biggest claim to fame would be Billy Joel. He did several of Billy Joel's biggest albums, The Stranger, 52nd Street, on and on and on. Also, he's worked with pretty much every famous singer along the way. Elton John, he does a lot of live performance kind of capturing. It'll all be produced by Phil Ramone. Just look him up. Anyway, we were doing a piece about Barry Manilow, and he was in the studio with Barry Manilow recording, and at the same time I was also working on a project for Ray Charles, because Ray Charles had just done the Genius Loves Company that won all the Grammy Awards. So we were trying to get a soundbite about Ray from him because he helped produce a lot of that. And then at the same time, we said, let's try to get a soundbite about Barry Manilow. So it all went really, really well, and he talked a lot longer than what we needed. So it's really cool you can hear all of this here, because he talks a lot about music and producing and really just about, you know, what these people are like. So here's the first one about Ray Charles.
First, tell me a little bit about working with Ray Charles.
I think the best thing to talk about Ray Charles for me is the musicianship, and then the affection he has for not only the songs, but the way he treats songs. When you figure it out over 30 some odd years or more, he made classics out of songs that a lot of people wouldn't have thought of, including obviously Georgia, America the Beautiful. This album has an incredible choice of songs, I think.
Working with him, doing this duets live thing, was this a throwback to the old way of recording? Is there any?
Yeah, you really don't want to make an album without both artists there. There's something that happens. There's a vibe that happens. People get into the room, and you could see, like Bonnie Raitt and Diana Krall and people like that, feeling the intensity and the pacing before he showed up. And then once he starts and he sits at the keyboard and he'd say something like, "No, darling, I think you could do this, and how about if you sing that, so that you have the complete intensity of what the song is about." And he makes room, so you can't prearrange anything other than just make sure the chords and stuff are right for him, and then he's liable to change them anyhow. So the creativity is all about that you could never plan on, because I don't think he would be comfortable if the other artist wasn't there.
How was he with working with the artist? You touched on it a little bit, but was he nice? Was he forceful? Did he direct
Well,
them
he's
a lot?
very persuasive, and I think you want to be persuaded by him, because at the end of the day, I don't know anybody musically you want to mess with, particularly like him. I think you get so much from him. There's so much intensity in that short period, and he's very much in the tradition of let's get it right and do it, because we know what we are musically. And I think that's key for him. He has such a way of inviting you in, and that's why people said he's a taskmaster, because he doesn't want to spend 20 takes doing what he does. He gives right away.
Yeah, it seemed like everything I saw him do was one or two takes, and
That's it.
let's move on. Can we talk about, you did 4 or 5 songs on the album. Can we just take a little snippet about each artist, like
Sure.
maybe about the Bonnie Raitt, if you ever
Yeah.
lost my mind?
Don't ask me the
No,
titles.
did I ever?
Yeah.
I've just heard it so many times. You can just talk about Bonnie maybe a little bit.
Well, I love watching Bonnie prepare. She's the most natural of people when she comes in the room, but there's something about her that gets into the zone that is special for her, but also for us. And then, I could see her, there's a very childlike part of her. She gets rosy-cheeked because there's the man. And no matter what he did, if he switched something or tried something, and especially harmonies, I mean, that's a very personal thing, how you deliver the harmony. It's not like an old musical. It's something that's so particularly headed in the R&B world, the musical world of blues, which is a better statement than the R&B world, that you get this magic going between two people. It's an overused word, but it truly is magic. And then, of course, there's nobody plays guitar like her, for me.
She said in her interview, she said she was very nervous.
Yeah.
She said she came down. I thought he was going to run through it once, and all of a sudden we're going. And
Yeah.
She went,
You know, she's that. I mean, we have never really worked on anything like that before, and I come from that school that, you know, when he's coming down the hall, it's the Sinatra at Capitol rule. When I heard he's from the parking lot, I hit play, record, and off we go. Same thing. You don't want to miss anything. You never know in his feeling through what he wants. Or he said to Randy Waldman, the other keyboard player, arranger on some stuff, he said, "Oh, what was that chord you played?" You know, it was a substitute chord for something that he knew automatically would be either thrown out or it wouldn't. So no one is offended by what that music is about. And tempo. There is no one does the tempo. I think she was amazed, Bonnie, that is, where he set the pace for the song. And I think that came through with Diana Krall, too. Diana was, I would say, nervous a little bit anxious. I mean, you are in the same company of somebody that, there's a rare breed of great artists like that. And I could tell she was doing all right, and it came near the end, he wanted to have her phrase something a little slower and a little later, and with a nice high note, which maybe she was afraid to try or something, and she just kind of tested the note, and he said, "That's it. That's what we want." And that sometimes if you have good editing skills, you can take the best out of that natural take that everybody thinks is not going to get on the record. So I told him I was sort of trained by Tom Dowd, who was a great engineer at Atlantic and a producer. So that was okay for me because I had credibility with him.
"Oh, that's great." And the Van Morrison piece was for the songwriters, but that was a live cut, right?
That's live. The Van Morrison piece comes from, he was being honored by the Songwriters Hall of Fame, which I was the producer of. And when I had spoken to him in Ireland, he wasn't sure he was going to come or he could come. And I said it was so important to all of us, and the award really means something because there's wonderful writers in the room, plus the audience needs to see you. And he said, "Well, if I did come, I told him how it works. Someone sings one of your hits, and then you come and reply and sing one of your songs again, a different song." He said, "My dream is to sing with Ray Charles." So through the magic of people saying no most of the way, and then getting a yes from him and getting a yes from Ray, what you see in the morning was we didn't have any cameras going. I wish I did. But they came in and I felt a presence of somebody behind me. And Ray was at the piano, and I was talking to him as he was sort of feeling out the chords and using the braille to learn the lyric to make sure. And Van came in, and he was like a little boy, just in the joy of it, and then the two voices came together, and the hairs on your arms stand up. I mean, it's just an amazing accomplishment of what those two voices, and that performance is standing ovation time.
I thought Van's performance on that was like a lot better than I'd heard in recent years. Like he toned it down, or there was something about his.
I think what happens is when you're singing with Ray, when Ray takes a verse, and then he starts the song off, and then he says, "Come on," that's all he has to say to you, and Van gets the applause coming on stage. But I think there is an impassioned feeling between the two of them, and I think we not only have it on the visual side, but on the audio side.
Hell yeah, it was good. What was the most memorable thing about working with Ray? Have you worked with him in the past too, or just?
Yeah, I've had occasions to work with him. sometimes on television specials, or when Quincy Jones was producing, all through the years, including being the third assistant coffee boy on The Genius of Ray Charles, and watching Quincy Jones and Ahmet Ertegun, and just an amazing, Vanessa Ertegun was there. Watched him calling out wrong notes in the third trumpet. No, that should be a B. Where, no, that voicing is wrong. And I was fascinated because half of the band was like Count Basie band, the other half was the Ray Charles touring orchestra. It was incredible. And every once in a while, I did something in, like Duke, We Love You Madly was a big television show about Duke Ellington with both Duke and Basie there. But Ray was a special guest on that. And eventually, I was doing an album with Billy Joel. And we were talking about how great Ray is. And I said, it almost sounds like you wrote New York State of Mind for Ray. I mean, you could just imagine him singing it. And he said, God, I'd love to do something with him. And I called up and I got Ray on the phone. And I said, I don't know if you would consider this, but it would be something really special. And he said, well, let me hear the song. So Ray said, I'll wait. And Billy went home. The next morning, he walked in with a song called My Baby Grand. And he was so anxious because all this intensity. And we played it on the phone, sent him a tape, actually. And we waited for days and no answer, nothing. And then we got him on the phone about 4 or 5 days later. And Billy was so frightened to hear anything, he didn't want to hear the call. And so he opens this conversation with me. He says, very clever. Clever. I said, does that mean you like it? He said, yeah. So I said, Billy, come over here, listen to this. And within 3 or 4 weeks, we arranged to do it. And it's really a wonderful song. And I hope somebody remembers to put it out again so people can see it. So also was filmed, which is pretty nice.
All that. That's great. What do you think is Ray's contribution to music?
I'm afraid to say this, but I think that in the world of music, when you lose an icon, you wonder, does it ever come back? And I think what you have to do is honor what Ray is and was. When I say is, it never, for me, will go away. And I just hope that young people will know about him for a long, long time. And you just know that you've been fortunate enough to live in the period of life that he was around. And it's important for all of us to know how that music affected us, because he crossed every line there ever was. He never was limited in any musical format or any genre, so to speak. So I think he leaves an everlasting kind of musical statement for all of us, whatever field we're in, jazz, the street, no matter what.
Perfect. I think that's all I can. Anything else you want to say about Ray or the working in the sessions? Was it?
I think that the group, the engineers and the musical people around him rise to a different occasion, a la Sinatra, Tony Bennett. There is this feeling that you're going to be in a room with somebody who's going to engross you. And I once mentioned it with him that I felt like when Count Basie would sit down, the band played 100% different than when they were just rehearsing with Marshall Royal or any of the guys that were in the band. And there's nothing like it when you have that intensity. And you see that thing happen. And we were cutting with basically a quartet, except for the ones that John Burke did, which were big orchestrational. And the one I did with Elton John, which turns out to be, I think, the last thing that Ray did. And even though he was very fragile, I think the performance has all the sadness of what that song is about. Elton was so moved when he left. He still talks about it. He talks about it on stage.
Yeah, we interviewed him like 2 weeks 2-3 weeks later in Vegas, and yeah, he almost started crying talking about it. And he
Yeah.
said you guys sent him a CD of the behind the scenes chatter and stuff, and
Yeah.
he just loved it. He went on and on and on about it. That was cool. Um, let's talk about Super Audio CD because they are going to release this. John told me, and 2 weeks after, Ray's going to be released in Super Audio surround.
great.
Are you going to do the mix for that, or is that more?
No,
Al
I think
Schmidt?
it's more Al Schmidt.
Okay. Can you just tell me the philosophy and what mixing for Super Audio CD or DVD audio is?
Well, first of all, surround for me is the venue for the home that when we were kids we used to listen to the stereo sometimes with your family. I mean, that was the art room. And until the headphones got better and CDs got invented and stuff, it was pretty much a ritual to listen to music in the best environment. Then it took its own trip, running, listening to music with it, headphones or any format. This is the first format since the real large screen movies. And it allows us a palette that we've never had before. We almost had it once, but it never got commercial for the audience. And now that home theater viewing and people having DVDs in their homes, it's a great place to sit down and actually relax and hear the music come at you, because there's a lot of disagreement about how one should mix it, but I'm from that school of let's not just sit in an ambient room with it. Let's go and hear a great acoustic guitar coming at you and let it surround you. Music is never in one place for me. And I can't imagine not having Al Schmidt do this. He's been a part of the final mix for weeks and weeks. He's very good with this. There are a few people that I know and love dearly who have the same understanding of what I feel is important. And, we're in that era now.
I know you touched on what quadraphonic was what you were about to say.
Yeah.
Some people go, oh, is this quadraphonic?
No, not at all.
It's totally different.
We couldn't even translate the quadraphonic. If you came to the studio, we could play it for you in a discrete form. But there was no way. The disc sounded so horrendous, and playing it back was a whole other. You're encoding, decoding. It's very technical. But later on, my hope was, because I had done a couple of motion pictures, and I loved the surround, and I was working with Dolby in 75, 76 with Barbra Streisand, and we put out the first discrete, not only concert footage, but the soundtrack, and it was only in those theaters. And I said, I got to have this. I mean, we've got to have this privilege. It took years. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's 1975, and actually the first Cinerama that I ever saw as a little boy, when the roller, you went up on this thing and you were in an amusement park and stuff was happening all around you. You went crazy. And that was 3 cameras projected on 3 screens, so it's kind of like IMAX. There's no way that the audience now will accept, unless they have to, the small television with the little speakers in it. That's the advantage of the music. The music is so powerful, and if you can relive it, it's quite wonderful. And if there's some visuals to go with it, you can also turn the visuals off. Nobody says you have to watch. But if it's a concert piece, I think when Elliot Shiner did the Eagles and Frank Filippetti worked on Billy Joel with me, it was what I knew I wish people could have heard in the control room. And now you can do this. It's there. And it's managed financially to make it a feasible thing for people to enjoy. I can't wait to hear Ray in that format.
Perfect. One more, in the technical side, people hear something's remastered. All it is the 2-track masters, which saves the step. Talk about when you go revisit Billy Joel the Stranger, you're actually going to the original tapes, remixing and sending stuff around. Can you speak about that a little bit?
I mean, when you go into going back in the past, first of all, getting the original masters from storage, wherever they may be, they've gotten moved and around because people never thought you would go back to those masters. I was pretty meticulous. I was brought up very, very well to thinking about what might come someday, which has come. And you go back to that and you touch upon all the things you've done. I'm in the middle of, well, I did the Bob Dylan Blood on the Tracks again, and asking the company to let me have the original tapes, which I was the engineer in those days, on it, and I wanted to see my signature on it, so I know that it was authentic, and that it was the actual dates, the way they went, with mistakes and all. You hear a flat pick hitting against the mic, and stuff like that I think the audience deserves. Who knew that the record would be that big? And going back into it, we're visiting Paul Simon's Graceland, and Rhythm, and a whole bunch of Rhythm of the Saints. And I told him one day I'd love to go back to Ryman Simon, and still crazy after all these years. Though that to me is all about where we're going. You need to get the original group that did it. That's precious if you can get it. I mean, from the production team, because we don't forget. You never forget what goes on if you work on it. It's something about it stays within you, and you've always known that if you could have only heard. I mean, I keep referring to that, what it sounded like in the control room, because we had to make LPs in those days, which, as much as you're maybe a vinyl fan, it was not an easy chore at all.
Yeah, I've always heard the horror stories of squashing down the bass and all that just to fit
re-equalizing as you got near the end of the
the whole mastering process.
Yeah.
We better talk about Barry before I run out of time with you.
Sure.
Sorry, I could go on for hours about that.
We'll do my own show.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, this is Phil Ramone.
I want to interview Mel Schmidt too. We talked about it
Yeah.
on the Monica Mancini piece he worked on
Oh yeah.
with him, and they're doing that surround, but we never had a chance, so maybe I'll get him this time around.
Now here's the second part of that interview. We actually got him to talk a little bit about Barry Manilow because he was there helping Barry produce a song for one of his albums. And this was done at A&M Records up in Hollywood, which is really cool to go around that place. It was a little bit small, congested, but a lot of stuff has been done there. Like the We Are the World recording was done there. All the Carpenters hits were done there. Pretty much all the A&M artists had recorded there at one time or another. So that was kind of cool. That was the first and only time I got to go there. Enjoy this, and this is Phil Ramone, the record producer, again talking about Barry Manilow.
All right, I'm Barry Manilow. How did it come about that you were producing this new album?
Barry and I really have great respect for each other, and I did a couple of albums with him. We did an album about singing with the big bands, which was a really big visit to the original charts for the obviously new band versions, but the charts were the originals, the Glenn Millers and the Tommy Dorseys. We had a great time together. Then we did a tribute to Sinatra, his readings of those songs. And we've done various television shows together, and I don't know, there's a great respect. And he told me he was about to work on this, and he said, "Would you like to work on it?" And I said, "Yeah." I mean, scores of shows. This man is an incredible writer, besides performing. And I love the idea of us doing these things. Well, Copacabana is out there as a touring show, but I don't think people realize how a score works for a theater piece. You get the cast album, it's something else. Getting the composer to sing, which doesn't happen every day. And harmony, just the story and why and when it comes, to have a preview of the songs. I mean, when I was growing up, My Fair Lady, you heard the songs long before, if you ever got to see the show. And if you saw the movie, you already knew the songs. And it's a very inventive way to get your public to know it. He does it in concert. He does some of these songs that we're recording. And we're crafting it a little different than normal ways of doing things. They're big, big orchestrations with theatrical approach, but on the other hand, there's this undercoating of how a pop rhythm section might play this, which is what he does on stage. He has both elements. It's an amazing, amazing guy.
Have you ever worked on Broadway productions before? Is there some past that you're bringing to this as far as that?
Well, I've been very, very fortunate because I go back to my beginnings, and Burt Bacharach and Hal David hired me to produced the sound in the theater for Promises, Promises. And then I did the original Chicago and didn't get to produce anything until much later, but I had done quite a few of Bob Fosse's shows. And that's a discipline that you learn, and the recording of it all in one day. And they have very strange rules but they come from that tradition, so that everybody who's been recording it, performing it, then they come in the studio and grab it all in one day. It's pretty difficult. And the last few years, I did a show with Stephen Sondheim called Passion, which won a Grammy. And then I've done quite a few. I just did The Boy from Oz, which is probably going to close, I think, in a couple of weeks, but with Hugh Jackman. There is a clear understanding of a difference living in the theater, the way they approach what can go wrong, what does go wrong, previewing in one city and then moving to another. I love that more than I do the part where you just come to New York and you're on Broadway and you preview for 10 or 12 weeks. It's a different animal than when you go to Minneapolis for maybe a month, or Chicago or Philadelphia in the old days, in Boston. There's an excitement. You wake up every morning and you don't know what's going to get changed. Bad reaction to one song suddenly says that song's gone, or rewrite. Orchestrators are living with arrangers in the orchestra pit at 4. We may run it down once before the performance that night. There's nothing like it. It's an amazing place. And having recorded a lot of those albums from the days I started as an engineer and then got to be a producer, I think the magic, one day we'll see that the magic of the DVD and that will be the best introduction to a show, touring and learning the process. It's a wonderful process. It can be very cruel at times to people getting fired. But other than that, it moves in its own world. Nothing like it. And then if it transposes into a movie about, like Chicago did, Moulin Rouge was a made-up piece. But I think that every once in a while, it's so great to see it go that far. But I think that this in a 5.1 surround will be amazing.
Perfect. I have one last thing, and then Dave, if you can think of anything, if your mind's working on the Barry side. How is Barry to work with?
I love working with Barry. He's from the same school of immediacy, His mind goes at double speed. If he could record and speak at the same time and play and perform, he would do this in 2.5 hours. I think ideally for him, his live shows are what make him comfortable. The recording process, although he's very exacting and knows where he wants it to go, I get the feeling that I'm dealing with Mozart at times, Come on, let's go. But you can understand that because his mind can't. He did a thing today that fortunately you were shooting. He was conducting as he would conduct the orchestra, but singing and phrasing around his own conducting. That's almost impossible. It's, doing this. So when he did that, I thought, yeah, that's the Barry Manilow I love. That's cool. That's a challenge and a half.
I thought he should have been out here.
He could have.
He was.
If I didn't need
He was conducting almost more. That guy was watching him for cues. It was quite funny. And I thought his voice is going to suffer because he kept, hitting and holding that long note, but he held it.
No, when you watch him on stage, his motions, that's why his rhythm section is here on these dates, because some of these songs he's performed with them, and it's amazing. He knows exactly. He's got this clock in his head, where it is, what's the tempo, and why. We did 2 takes that most people would have thought were very similar, but they're so far removed from allowing him to sing and back phrase and then emotionally take you somewhere. He's the king of that. He's the absolute king. And believe me, it's like tying your hand down and waving with this and then smiling over here and acting over there. It's fascinating.